and we get none of it. What does it mean, all the toils of our labor? You know, one of my favorite books, actually probably my favorite book, and one of my favorite movies is The Lord of the Rings. And I think one of my favorite lines in all of literature actually comes from the very first book. And it happens in a different place in the movie than it does in the book. But early on, if you know this story, if you don't, sorry, again, statute and limitations have passed. But there's one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring, what is it? Now I messed it up. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness find them. That's it. And so the story, Frodo has received this ring that he got from his uncle Bilbo. And as Gandalf is telling the story early on of the history of this ring and everything that's come to him and basically how the world is about to fall apart, and it's all about to fall right onto Frodo himself, comes one of my favorite things. I love what Frodo says to Gandalf here. He says to him after he's hearing about all this is coming, Frodo says to him, "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." And he says, behind that, and he's talking about what would happen behind the ring, behind that there was something else at work, behind any design of the ring maker. I can put it no plainer than by saying Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and not by its maker. In which case, you also were meant to find the ring. And that may be an encouraging thought. And I love that Frodo follows it up with, "And it's not." But you know, when it comes to the times that we're in, the things that happen, you know, last week we looked at the first 2 chapters of Ecclesiastes and the futility of life under the sun. And the hevel that we have of grasping after meaning in our life. Grasping after possessions that give us nothing. Grasping after experiences. Or grasping after wisdom, like we just saw in the video, right? Grasping after the things that we think, if we only have this, life will now finally have meaning. But we saw that there is just futility in finding our meaning in the things that we can possess or experience or gain, right? But we did see last week that there's the beauty that is in the one, only in the one who can give true meaning to that vapor of life, to the one who makes the crooked straight. Well, this week we take a look at our second grasping at futility. We've got our little futility wheel up here. One we've all longed for one time or another. The one that the more we try to grasp after it, I think the quicker it flows away from our grasp. The one in The Hobbit when one of Gollum's riddles to Bilbo says, "This thing all things devour, birds, beasts, trees, flowers, gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones to mill, slays kings, ruins town, and beats mountains down." And what is that one thing? Time. Time, the one thing we all wish we had a little bit more of, and yet the more we grasp after it, the faster it seems to go away, right? And the author here in Ecclesiastes is going to show us how we humans want to control in our life. We want to grasp and control the times. But the reality is that they've all been appointed to us. So I think instead of saying, "Can I grasp it?" we must ask the question, like what Gandalf says to Frodo, what will you and I choose to do with the time that's given us? That is of utmost importance. And here we are in chapter 3, in a passage that's actually quite popularized. You hear it in 60s rock, right? You hear it at funerals. It's one of the things in first eight verses, it could even be done in an atheist funeral. A lot of people have used these words to show, in some sense, the futility of what we have in this life. And the author begins in verse 1, he says, "For everything there's an appointed time." And the word here in the Greek, we even have it's kind of the translation of the Hebrew, is the chronos. The appointed, like the time, like the idea when I look at my watch, there's a certain time of the day that is appointed. But not only that, he says there's also an appropriate kairos, time period, or in a sense, a time in history. All these things, there's a purpose for everything and every activity on earth. There's a purpose and a time for everything you and I encounter in this life. And he's going to flesh these things out in verses 2 through 8 in all of its poetic beauty. And I think this list, as you see it, as Philip read it earlier, there's a time to be born, a time to die, plant and uproot and kill and heal, all these different things. It's a fascinating group. I think scholars for a very long time have tried to find some type of, is there a connectedness to this? Is there some type of pattern or repetition? But it seems much of it's just random, is it not? I think perhaps just like what? The randomness of life that we run into. But interestingly, it begins with what truth in verse 2? That there is a time to begin this life, and there is an appointed time for it to end. And everything else falls in between these two times, and this encompasses the totality of everything that happens in our life. And the truth is, these two times have been appointed to you and to me. I think there's a lot of randomness in this, but I think there's maybe one thread that does kind of move through these appointed times. And I think it's this. It's the idea of relationships. Why? I think almost every pair involves connectedness, if you look, to other people in our lives, right? Because what are we? We're profoundly relational beings, are we not? And much of life is nothing but navigating the different stages, these relationships and the effects that they have on us. There's a time to dance, right, with the one that you're going to marry one day, on your wedding day. And there may come a time where you mourn the very one that you danced with. There's a time to laugh together, but there's also a time to weep for what those who we laughed with have done to us. There's a time to reach out and touch one. There's another time to respect the boundaries, both the physical and emotional boundaries of one another. There's a time to grow to love some people, and there's a time to come to hate others. But what happens if we remove the relationships from one another, right? From the webs of life, life becomes monotonous, does it not? If you take away the relationships, it becomes monotonous. And I think every one of us experienced this in one way just about 2 to 3 years ago, did he not? Remember what happened, and I know it wasn't as bad here in Texas, but some of us that came from California or New Jersey or other places, what happened 3 years ago? When the world was shut down, right? Do you remember those days when, I don't know about you, but often in those days when you weren't allowed to leave your house for any reason except to go to the grocery store, and that's about it. And you go, what day is it? I don't remember how many times Ashley and I said to each other, what day is it? I don't even know why, because we go through routines. We have these things that connect us to other people. I go to work and I see other people, or I go to the store, or I go to church, or I go to other things. And we lose this time because everything just kind of stopped and just kind of fell flat in that, right? We say, what'd you do? Nothing, right? Nothing new happened for about 6 months. Why? Because life's tied up in relationships. And I think that time that we went through in the government shutdowns, they stripped much of that away from us, did it not? And I think we realized that the time went by very quickly, or at the same time, it went by very slowly, and we had no control over what our time looked like. And I think the author wants to give us a perspective on these times in our lives. Some are joyful, some are unfair. Some bring life, others rob us of it, do they not? But the reality is that these moments, and here's the sad reality, here's the harsh reality of Ecclesiastes. All of those moments that come, whether they're good, they're bad, they're pleasant, they're unpleasant, all of them are largely out of our control. They've been appointed to us. We can make plans, but we don't always control them on our stopwatch, right? I think today I want 3 hours of mirth, and I want 20 minutes of sorrow tomorrow. That's all I want. I'll be happy with this thing for 2.5 years, and at that point, then I'll be looking for something else, right? I'll move on to the next thing. But life's not like that, is it? Life doesn't work always that way. So much is out of our hands. So what do we do? In those times between being born and dying, what can we do? Look at verses 9 through 11. Not only is it out of our hands, none of it is only appointed, but he hits us at another reality, 9 through 11. He says, what benefit can a worker gain from his toil? I've observed the burden that God has given people to keep them occupied. God has made everything fit beautifully in its appropriate time, but he's also placed ignorance in the human heart, so that people cannot discover what God has ordained from the beginning to the end of their lives. And I think the author here, he's frustrated, is he not? He's a little frustrated. Why? Because the times are appointed. And for what gain? What gain do we have in these appointed times that we go through? He says what? Who knows? I have no idea if it's going to matter or not. I have no idea if I have all of my ducks in a row, right? I think there's a cleverness of that. That I might not just have a heart attack right then and there and drop dead, and my son, who the only thing he cares about is that bandana. Notice those on there? That's all he cares about. And he throws it out. What gain is there in all these times, all the things that I go through? God ordains all things in our lives, and we think that we have control. But the reality is we're bound by these times and seasons, but God is not. And he says he weaves them together as he chooses. He can make them all beautiful in their time, but that is for him to decide, not for us to decide. Which honestly, anybody in here, is that frustrating? Anybody? Any show of hands? Is that frustrating that we don't have a say in many things that happen in our lives? But not only that, verse 11, he says, not only has he put them together, but he tells us that God is the one that not only puts things together, makes them beautiful in his time, but what does he put in us? He puts in us the wondering or the why. The why question, he puts it in our hearts to ask the why, only to find out that what? We don't even get an answer. He puts the why there, but he doesn't give us any hope that we'll see the answer to that question. You know, some versions here, they put this idea, they put the word eternity in here. Anybody has eternity? See a few of them, yeah, quite a bit. It says that he puts eternity in our hearts. And I think a lot of people I think it's meant to try to do this. The word there in Hebrew, actually, the word olam, has this idea of really of a darkness or a veil. And it's also related in its kind of root to an eternal time. But I think some try to put this idea in there that God puts this eternity in your heart in the sense that he helps us to know and long for the beauty of eternity. No, I don't think that's what he's saying there at all. I think what he's saying here is that actually God puts all things out there. He makes them in his time, and he puts the why in our heart, and he puts a veil over it. He puts darkness there so that, what? People cannot discover what God has ordained from the beginning to the end of their lives. The author says that God gives us the longing to know, but prevents us from knowing it. I can ask freely, but there's no guarantee I'll get the answers. I don't know about you, but that's a hard thing, right? I like to have control. I like to think that the things that I'm going to make decisions I'm going to make today are going to have lasting impressions on tomorrow. I like to think that the things I would do today are going to set me up for success tomorrow. That the finances that I secure and lay out, or the house that I pay off, or whatever it may be, is going to set me up for tomorrow where I can make all the decisions that I want and I can do with the time that I please. But God says, you have no idea what happens tomorrow. You know, it's funny, our kids, I think they make our two kids, they make many decisions in their day-to-day to pattern their lives, do they not? And they do. They have some control, right? They have some control over what they do, whether or not they're going to play or whether they're going to be little, butts to one another or whatever they're going to do. They're going to play nice. They have decisions that they make in their life. But Ashley and I are the ones that come alongside and we make the bigger decisions for them, right? The larger them, the ones that they don't see the bigger picture of what they do. What they're going to eat, what they're going to wear, what their bedtime is, whether they're allowed to go and do something or not. They don't always see it, but there are ordered events there in their lives to provide them security and the best kind of freedom. We control, as parents, their ability to make some decisions. Why? To give them freedom. And you go, but you're making decisions for them. But I think it's the freedom from what? All of the stress and all of the worry of coordinating events through their day. It's funny, and this is kind of morbid, and I guess my mind goes there. Maybe I'm because I'm in Ecclesiastes. But the other night, I had this dream that for some reason, Ashley and myself and Stedman all died. Yeah, I know, like I told you, it's morbid. But I woke up and I thought to myself, it didn't really scare me. I thought, what would actually happen to Pax, who's 4.5? What would he do if he had to now all of a sudden wake up and everybody else is not moving? I was thinking, how long before he went and raided the pantry? How long would he actually figure out to maybe go across the street? I don't know, he's 4.5. How long would he be in that house? Hopefully, one of you all would figure out. You didn't see me. And actually, in the dream, we didn't show up on Sunday morning, so thankfully, somebody was going to go, Christopher's not here, so maybe we should check on him. But he doesn't have to think about those things. He doesn't have to think about that, right? He has the freedom to be a kid. He has the freedom to go and play Sonic with his brother and Knuckles like they did last night. They have that freedom because mom and dad make a lot of those decisions for them, right? They have the best kind of freedom, and they get the wisdom, I think, they have that's growing to know how to use the freedom at the right time and when not to use it. But I think we as adults were similar in that way as the kids with God. Like a good parent who coordinates all things for their children to live in freedom, God has ordained these things and made them beautiful. They've made them beautiful. He's made them beautiful in their time, and He helps us to achieve true wisdom, which to live in our freedom. But what happens is you and I, we don't know the why. We don't get the why, but what are we called to do anyway? To trust. Like we said last week, to put the fruit back on the tree. Do we have everything we need? But he goes on further. He says in verses 12 through 15, listen to this. He says, I've concluded that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and enjoy themselves as long as they live. And also that everyone should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil, for these things are a gift from God. I also know that whatever God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it. Nothing can be taken away. God has made it this way so that men will fear Him. Whatever exists now has already been, and whatever will be has already been. For God will seek to do again what has occurred in the past. And the author's saying, here's our reality, folks. What God has ordained will come to pass, whether you and I like it or not. You might think you can control it, but you can't. What He does endures forever. And I think this can be an idea that can lead to despair, or it can lead to hope. I think it's a very fine line where we sit in this idea. It can lead to despair. It can lead to hope. I am not in control of the times that I walk through, ultimately. And I think for the author of Ecclesiastes, for Solomon here, I think it's a bit of despair. Look what he says in verses 16 and following. He says, I saw something else on earth. In the place of justice, there's wickedness. In the place of fairness, there was wickedness. I thought to myself, God will judge both the righteous and the wicked, for there's an appropriate time for every activity, and there's a time of judgment for every deed. I also thought to myself, it's for the sake of people, so God can clearly show them that they're like the animals. To Solomon, we are no better off than what? Cattle. We're no better off than cattle. I had a couple this morning. They were here. They were in membership class. They came to church, and about 10 after 10, they said, we got to go. I was like, what happened? Our cows got out, right? Just the dumb animal cattle controlled their life. And now they're off in Sulphur Springs dealing with their cattle and not getting this worship. They think they had control coming this morning, right? And yet because of control, they're no better off than those animals that are controlling their life. For the fate of humans and the fate of animals are all the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Both have the same breath. Go back to Genesis 1. Look, same breath is in the animals. The same breath is in men and women. There's no advantage for humans over animals, for both are fleeting. Both go to the same place. They're made the same day, right? The beasts of the field are made on the same day, day 6. They're made of the same stuff, and they're going to return to the exact same place, he says. God has appointed all things in their time, whether we like it or not. So for Solomon, it seems like a despair. Who really knows if the human spirit ascends upward and the animal spirit descends to the earth? So I perceive that there's nothing better than people to enjoy their work because that's their reward. Who can show them what the future holds? I don't know. There can be despair, but I think there can be hope. And I think the hope starts to come when you and I realize that there is a force behind what you and I do. There's a force that's directing every one of our steps. Like Gandalf said to Frodo, that something was behind that meant for Bilbo to find the ring, and something else was meant for him to find it. There's a force that makes all things beautiful in their time. And the hope is that we can live free from living in the extremes that come. Free from trying to be the master of our day-to-day. Free to enjoy today while we have it, right? Free to choose to do what to do with the time that's given us in wisdom, as Frodo did. And so I think we get to verse 12. I think this is his earthly wisdom of what we can get. Rejoice. He's like, what else is there to what? I have concluded there's nothing better than to be happy, to enjoy themselves as long as they live. Eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. Today. Right now. Why? Because what? We're not promised tomorrow. Because it won't last. What do we do over and over? I thought I had my phone with me. What do we do over and over? Half the reason that we take our phone out, other than being on the internet, is to do what? Half of us, the only reason why we have a phone, especially grandparents, is for what reason? Pictures, right? You get on those pictures, getting the grandchildren, taking hundreds and hundreds of pictures over and over. Why? To capture a moment. To be able to come back to it at some point and go, oh, look at that, it's amazing. And those are good things, right? We can look back on pictures, we can look back on videos, and we can enjoy them. But they're not what? They're not the experience. There's this wonderful picture back in the day. I meant to do it, and I totally forgot. There's this great picture of this one guy, like it's a golfing event, and Tiger Woods is on he's on the green about to putt, and you have this picture of the whole crowd behind him. He's in the forefront, and the crowd behind him, and it's literally nothing but phones, the whole thing, save for, you know it, one guy that's sitting there doing this with his hands down, living in the moment. While everybody else is hoping to capture the moment, they're looking here, and it's happening right here. And there's only one guy that gets it. And I'm like, I want to be that one guy. In the moment. Because though we can capture the precious moments, we look back, but we can never get the moments back. And when we try to, it's like what? Grasping after the wind. And Solomon says, enjoy them now because they don't last. But there's got to be more than that, right? That's the hope of the secularist. That's the hope of one that doesn't believe in any of this. That's the hope. That's all we can find is enjoy the moment now. And there is wisdom in that. There's goodness in that. But there's got to be more, right? Look with me at Luke 18. Luke chapter 18. Jesus has just told this story. He's come to, a wealthy ruler has come to him. He says, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life, right? And Jesus tells him, you know the commandments. Don't commit adultery. This is not up there. Don't murder. Don't steal. Don't give false testimony. Honor your father and your mother. And the guy goes, I've done all those, Jesus. I'm good. We're good. And what does Jesus tell this rich young ruler? Go and what? Sell everything you have and come and follow me. Sell all you have, give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. Get rid of it all and come follow me. And what does that guy do? He goes, yes. What does he do? He walks away sad. Why? Because he had a bunch of stuff. That's right. Exactly. That's the new Deborah version. NDV. He had a bunch of stuff, and his heart was sad. Because where was his heart? In the things that he had accumulated. And Jesus follows it up. He says, how hard is it for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven? It is easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle. And I love what the disciples, because, obviously this guy's been doing it right. He's rich. He's got everything. Obviously this man has done it right? And they go, well, if he can't get in, then what? Who can be saved? And Jesus says, what's impossible for mere humans is possible for God. And this is what I want to get to. And I love this. What does Peter say to respond to that? Look at verse 28. And Peter said, look, we have left everything we own to follow you. Peter begins to say the one thing that we can truly find hope in. Because here's the thing, if the author of Ecclesiastes is correct concerning the injustices of life, why do we cling to them as though they give us hope? If life is truly that unjust and we can't control it, why do we still reach out and try to grasp it as though it's going to mean something? I'm going to hold on to the time and it's not going to fall out of my grip. And Peter asks Jesus, I think what he's doing here, look, Jesus, we've left everything for you. He's asking one question. Is it worth it? Is it worth it that we have left everything to follow you, Jesus? To which Jesus replies in 29, Jesus said to them, I tell you the truth, there is no one who has left home or wife or brothers or parents or children for the sake of God's kingdom who will not receive many times more in this age and in the age to come eternal life. Jesus says to Peter, it most assuredly is worth it. Church, in these times, in these seasons, the one thing that truly can gain us fulfillment, the thing to give us the ultimate answer to the why in life that brings true riches, riches which not only last but multiply both here and in the age to come, is to live for the sake of the kingdom of God. You and I are to enjoy the little things in life, but ultimately we are to lay them at the feet of Jesus. Because if not, it's all what? Hevel. It's all futility. One of my other favorite movies is A Shawshank Redemption. I know I've got somebody else, I know there's one or two in here that's their favorite. There's a great quote in that movie where Red says to Andy Dufresne, he says, Andy, you got two choices. You got to get what? You got to ready to get busy living or get busy dying. Get busy living or get busy dying. You either get busy living for Christ and His kingdom, all the while enjoying the day-to-day times and in seasons that He sovereignly provides, or you get busy dying, living for what you cannot control, for what will ultimately be futility, that which leads to death. And so I ask you, church, each one of us have to answer this question. What will you do with the time that is given you? Let's pray.